Sound check, yes. M saying we don't want a muted bias. You nearly had a very muted bias because I've been experimenting with microphones. People don't like this microphone, which I'm still on. I'm actually surrounded by microphones. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there. But I had set up another one to see if it was better. I did it with the Graham show yesterday, and it wasn't really. There was another problem with it, and so I'm still messing about with them. And then when I came up here to start for it, I completely forgot. So I've been throwing cables and microphones around just to throw something up. So I'm basically back on the old one, but in a different place. But I'm going to keep experimenting. But anyway. So we're talking today, basically, I want to talk about a little article, Andrew Adonis, who's, people may remember, Labour peer. It's got a bit quiet recently, but he's a big anti-Brexiter, and he's been talking about if the Conservative Party are going to be finished as a result of immigration. I mean, that's the thing that's killing them, immigration. Then, you know, he's going to say it's going to be largely down to the Boris-wave, by which he means the massive surge in immigration that followed Brexit under Boris Johnson's immigration policy. But, you know, as we're because for a question like this, you really talk. I mean, let me put up the article. It's a free thingy article, so I don't think I'm, you know, treading on any toes by reading bits of it out here. Where's it gone? There it is. The Boris-wave may destroy the Tories. And for something like this, you say the sound's much better. It's the same sound. It's the same one. But I am going to keep experimenting anyway. The problem with this microphone, it's a really good microphone. It's like, it's you know, the dog's Watsits of podcasting microphones. There isn't a better one. However, annoyingly, the volume control is controlled sort of digitally, which means sometimes bits of software muck about with it, including this one, and it'll automatically, it'll go, oh, yeah, it's too loud, I'll turn it down for you. It's like, can you not? And there's no setting for me to say, can you not? It just does it. So I might be better off with a not as good quality microphone for this purpose anyway. You have different microphones for different things. But maybe I'll be better one with one that where it can't. But you say the sound sounds clearer. Honestly, it's the same microphone. Anyway, never mind. So someone put something up here which could be related, because I think the question has to be say, what do we mean by destroying the Tories? Because what I don't think is on offer, I'll start, and I've said this before, but just to start us off with, I don't think what's on offer is the actual Conservative Party ceases to exist. I don't think that happens, because then you say what replaces it. Now, you could imagine a future whereby Reform UK occupy the right to far right area, and the Liberal Democrats, someone just asked about the Liberal Democrats, we'll come on to that, could occupy the centre to right. Yeah, so they could divvy up the right-wing votes between them. And it's just realistically, I'm not sure I see that happening. Mostly because I don't think Reform UK are trying to become a serious political party. You know, I still go back to after the election, but, you know, Nigel Farage has won his 5 MPs. I don't know, yeah. Krishnan Gurumurthy, that was it, on Channel 4 News was asking Nigel Farage, are you going to become a proper political party now? By which he meant not a limited company owned by Nigel Farage, but a proper political party with infrastructure, committees, executive committees, local infrastructure, you know, the sort of thing you get with every other political party, even some very fringe ones who will never win an MP. And Nigel Farage was a bit reticent. He's going, oh, do we really need to? And then a few weeks later, he appoints a new chair of the party, Zia Yusuf. And Zia Yusuf's all about, yeah, we need to turn it into a proper party. At which point, Nigel Farage, obviously they talk to each other. Nigel Farage had said, oh yeah, we're gonna turn into a proper party, proper democracy, and I'll give up my shares in the party. And okay, something like that doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but I'm not seeing any sign of them even moving towards it. He said it. I'll put it this way. I would not, I'm not going to bet anything, but I would not be at all surprised if come the next election, Nigel Farage still owns Reform UK. Now, if Reform UK do not turn themselves into a proper political party, they cannot long-term exist in politics. They can't. There's, you know, already you're starting to see signs that they can't manage the party. And in time, that's just going to get bigger. Like, for example, I mean, you look at Kemi Badenoch or Keir Starmer or Ed Davey, they can't manage the whole party. They need various people working on like party discipline and vetting and things like this. You know, they can't be dealing with the day-to-day business of running the party because they're, you know, they've got their parliamentary work, they're MPs, they've got their constituency work, and they've got management of the party campaign and everything like that. One person can't manage all that. So they'll become too stretched. And then what happens when Nigel Farage has to step down? Because at some point, age is going to get him. You know, he looks perfectly fit and healthy at the moment. I know he drinks like a fish and smokes like a chimney, but he seems perfectly fit and healthy at the moment. But that may not last. I mean, when he's in 10 years' time, he's 70 years old. I really don't think Labour Labour, I really do think are going to win the next election with a majority still. I think they're going to have a strong enough majority. So you're talking 10 years' time, roughly, before Reform UK could possibly be in a situation where it's... Someone's just said the lighting's improved too. Yeah, you are imagining things. Everything's the same. It's even the same microphone. It's just... I changed it out and I've changed it back in. But anyway, so yeah, you know, so what we're really probably talking about is the Canada situation, whereby the Conservative Party, via whatever means, is permanently changed, so that the Conservative Party of Margaret Thatcher and John Major no longer exists. That people like that would no longer be welcome in the party. That's what we're talking about. Even though, it sounds mad because you think, oh, aren't they all fans of Thatcher? It's like, yeah, but they would never allow they have to say that, but they would never allow someone like Thatcher to dictate policy. Farage will probably try selling franchises in Reform UK, maybe, who knows. But anyway, so going back to that Lib Dem thing someone brought up, so it's the Tories moving away from the centre of politics, which they're like, the Tories were never really a centre or centre-right party, I don't think, if you looked at what they did in government. But they always positioned themselves right of centre to win elections. So, yeah, now that they're not even pretending to... They keep saying they're right of centre. They will say they are right of centre, but they're not. Reform UK say they're right of centre. They're absolutely not. But anyway, Tories moving away from central politics for a generation may finish them off if the Lib Dems take advantage of it. Now, it is very difficult for them. I mean, I saw someone recently attacking Ed Davey again for, like, you know, little stunts and stuff like that, you know, like he did during the campaign. And I mean, I remember the first time he did one of those for the election campaign. I thought, what are you doing, mate? But then I just sort of realised, what's he supposed to do? Because he was getting no mentions in the media. The only mentions Ed Davey got in the media were those stunts. That was it. You could say, but he was there at the debate, so he took part in the debates. It's like, yeah, so if you watch the debates, you got to hear from Ed Davey and the Lib Dems. But how many, whether it be broadcast news or whether it be print news, how many news outlets did a piece on what Ed Davey had said as a result of those debates? Didn't really, did they? Hardly any. And the same with the Green Party, except the Green Party were not even in all of the debates. So, yeah, the Lib Dems and the Green Party have some issues in terms of visibility. The Green Party have got a bigger problem in that their best source of useful votes, shall we say, because there's no point in getting millions of votes or 1.5 million votes, whatever they got. What did they get? About 2 million votes or something in the end. There's no point in getting that and like winning 4 seats. Just like Reform UK have realised, winning 4 million votes and winning like 5 seats is not a great return. So where the Green Party could actually pick up votes to win seats is, and this would pressure Labour, of course, are those sort of urban votes, the cities that are at the moment Labour strongholds. But those are the sort of areas they've got young graduates, people like that, who are more likely to be attracted to the Green Party if they, feel like not supporting Labour. And yet, the seats that the Green Party have, and I've said this before, the seats that the Green Party have are very NIMBY areas, which is why they are very NIMBY. It's why they have these ridiculous positions like, oh, we want more railways. That's the best thing. We need more trains. And it's like, okay, so we'll put a rail line down here. No, we don't want more rail lines. We just want more trains. It's like, well, where are they going to go? And the same with the pylons. So we need more clean energy. That means you need to build it closer to where it needs to be. And that includes a lot of the south of England. And it's like, okay, great. Yeah, we want that. But we just don't want any pylons. So it's like, so you want the clean energy. You don't want the pylons delivering it. And you have these nonsense situations. And it's because they're in NIMBY areas. If they don't adopt a NIMBY attitude, they lose a load of those votes. But so they're in a position where they're going to have to choose: do you go after more seats in the areas where you can't be afford to be NIMBY, or do you just stick to your 4 seats that you've got now, or try to? But the Lib Dems don't have to be so. They don't have to change a huge amount. They just need, all they need is the visibility. Their policies sort of work for the sort of areas they're challenging in, and the sort of areas they could challenge in. So Lib Dem policies do work for them. It's not so easy to poke holes in them for the sort of voters they'll be trying to attract. They just need more visibility, but they don't have it. But anyway, going on to this Andrew Adonis thing. So I'll go over his line of thinking here. I do think there are a couple of things that are worth bearing in mind that he hasn't maybe tackled. But he sort of says here, he starts off, the politics of immigration may well destroy the Conservative Party. If so, the Boris-wave will be a prime cause. Now, what he's getting at here is, so you look at the polls at the moment, Reform UK doing really well. In fact, there could well be a position later this year. There's been the odd poll that's had Reform UK even ahead of Labour, but, in terms of the margin for error, it's like round about the same. But there could come a point, because, at the moment, Labour actually have good news to shout about, but they're not doing it. During winter, NHS waiting lists have fallen for the fourth month in a row. That's not happened. That's not happened since Labour were last in power. That's not happened. If it was happening over summer, you would think, well, it's summer. That has happened over summer under the Tories. It's never happened over winter. So that is something to shout about, but they're not doing. There's the, workers' rights bill going through Parliament. They should be talking about that. They're not doing. So at the moment, they're occupying the ground that Farage is very comfortable on. But there will come a time where Labour they're going to want to go, look what we've done with the NHS, look what we've done with your rights, look at how your standard of living is improving. In a few years' time, they should be able to show some progress on housing and energy and hopefully water. They'll have hopefully sorted the water companies out by then as well. So they'll have things that they can talk about that's not immigration. And then the Conservatives have got nowhere. Every time the Conservatives try to say, oh, we've got this plan for immigration, people will just go, oh, yeah, like last time. And that's the thing. Who's going to believe a Conservative that's saying, oh, yeah, we recognise that we didn't get a control of immigration? Because Boris Johnson said the same thing. He said, yeah, my predecessors failed on immigration, but I'm taking us out of the EU and I'm going to give us this points-based immigration system. It's going to be marvellous. But it's not. And as Adonis is pointing out here, So net migration, it says here, rose from 184,000 in 2019 to 906,000 in 2023. And that was all 100% Boris Johnson. Although, you know, by 2023, we were on to our second Prime Minister after him. So we'd had Liz Truss and then we'd had Rishi Sunak. Those figures were as a result of Boris Johnson, I mean, Priti Patel, but under Boris Johnson's immigration policy. Are Labour talking to France about a process essential on their side? No. In fact, they've actually put it in writing. They said they're not interested in... Well, they've done better than the Conservatives in that they are setting up safe routes for people who have family links in the UK. So if there's someone living in the UK and legally settled in the UK, there is... I don't know whether it's in place yet or going to be, but they have said officially that there is going to be a process to claim asylum if you've got that family link. Now, the idea with that is if you've got family living, because one of the big problems, like political problems, I should say, not administrative problems, but one of the big political problems with asylum is, so Reform UK and people like that will keep claiming, oh, they get these hotels. It's like, no, they don't. They're homeless. If you claim asylum in the UK, you get nothing to begin with. The assumption is you have somewhere to live. But of course, a lot of people aren't going to have somewhere to live. They've just fled somewhere to come here. So then they can apply for emergency housing. But, you know, there's a process. You're going to be unemployed for a bit. And we know that. Suella Braverman tried to kick their tents in, if you remember. How do you have on the one hand the same newspapers that were talking about Suella Braverman trying to take their tents away, and on the other hand talking about them getting posh 4-star hotels? Which is it? Do they live on the streets in a tent, or do they live in a posh hotel? Anyway. This idea will be, if you've got family in the UK, you've got somewhere to live. You'll just bunk up with them, right? So I suspect the idea, obviously they're not explicit about this, but I suspect the idea of it is it's managing asylum to an extent, and it's tipping it in favour of people seeking asylum who will have somewhere to live, and therefore you haven't got all this messing about needing like council accommodation and stuff like that. I think that's the reason, but it's still not very satisfactory, because then what do you do if you're seeking asylum? There's no scheme set up. You're not coming from Ukraine, or I don't even know. We haven't even got a decent system for Afghanistan, even though even the Tories accept that they need asylum. And no, Labour are not talking about setting up safe routes really beyond those with family links, which is, yeah, okay, it's better than the Tories, but it's not going to stop the boats. But, I mean, with Labour, they're not putting all their eggs in the immigration. First of all, Labour, they will boast about lower net migration figures. The problem is, obviously, that only counters the Tories, but it does counter the Tories. So where Labour in competition with the Tories, they will get to say, we did better on immigration, and people will have to accept that. They'll be able to, as much as, you know, some people may not like it, they'll be able to boast lower net migration and higher deportations. It doesn't work against Reform UK, but Labour have other things. They have NHS waiting lists coming down. They have real terms pay going up. They have better workers' rights. They're going to have better energy. We're going to boost the capacity of the national grid and make it cleaner energy. So they're going to do a lot of stuff, housing. They're going to do a lot of stuff that's going to appeal to people. Whereas what are the Tories even talking about at the moment? What are the Tories talking about? Asylum. That's it. It's all they're talking about. Asylum. Oh, and they don't like some of Labour's tax policies, but they won't say what their own are instead. That's it. And But immigration is gonna finish them if they don't start, for example, and you know, even if they suddenly decide to see, that's what they should have. They should have stopped talking about immigration to begin with. They should never have mentioned it. Like Adonis is saying here that this Boris-wave is what finished them off and allowed Reform UK easy thing, and it's like, yeah, it is. If they'd never done something that stupid, if they had never, you know, adopted these crazy policies, then yeah, it wouldn't have happened. But they were where they were, and it was not because of asylum either. People blow asylum out of all proportion. It's tiny. It's like 2 or 3% of all immigration. So really, it's the economic migration that screwed them because, as everyone pointed out, if you have people, if you say to people from Europe, right next door, we're going to make it harder for you to work here, so not as many work here. So EU migration plummeted, but you need the workers, so you get the workers from Africa and Asia. Well, they're coming a long way, so they're bringing their family, right? Now, and it mentions in the article, the Tories then just last year, they made it harder to bring dependents. So that will impact the immigration figures. The problem is they did it so late on in the parliamentary cycle, no one will ever give them credit for it. But of course, it also means that just means you're going to reduce, if you reduce the capacity to bring in dependents, you'll reduce the capacity just to get workers in general. Because some of those workers will say, if I can't bring my family, I'm not coming. And it's not like the family are sat around doing nothing. They'd be working anyway. Best tool against reform is location, electricity pricing. Makes them look like proper Charles, gives people lower bills. So yeah, so Labour have talked about that as a policy. Mostly to smooth, because although Starmer's saying I'm going to absolutely ram these changes through the NIMBYs, I'm not, you know, even MPs on my own side, he's actually said this, he said, I've got the numbers, I'm ramming it through, right, against any protest. However, it is always better if you can get consensus. It's always better to get people's agreement for something than it is to just force it on them. That's your plan B. So yes, Labour have said that where there's going to be big infrastructure, like lots of new green energy development in an area, they could sweeten the deal by saying you'll get lower bills. So people who have these developments locally could end up getting lower bills. And the thing is, you would be able to do that. It's not. It wouldn't have been straightforward 20 years ago, but these days you could actually do something like that, where you have different rates depending on where you live. Because remember, why electricity is so high in this country is because it's pegged at the cost of producing it via gas. Fossil fuel energy is the most expensive form of energy. So if you've got a local development that's based on solar and battery storage or something like that, say, and that's supplying that local community, you can easily say, well, just bills a bit cheaper. Famous X saying, hi, believe it or not, I'm a Tory who knows your channel. I was wondering what you thought of one nation conservatism. At the moment, it's not, it doesn't have any traction. So one nation conservatives, the ones that the rest of us might sort of think of as the moderate, you know, not, well, some of them are very right-wing economically, but, you know, moderate conservatives, and not the English nationalists, we put it that way, certainly not the English nationalists. So what I gathered, and obviously I'm not capable of doing an exercise like this, but others were, so the big thing is, after the election, depending on how the election results gone, if we go before last summer, we sort of looked at the Tories, it's like, right, what happens to the Tory party may be down to which Tories lose their seats. Because what you find is a lot of the real crazies are in very, very, very safe seats. Because people like Suella Braverman and Liz Truss and people like that, and Priti Patel, could not win a seat in a marginal. They've no chance. They're too divisive. They're too crazy. They can only win extremely safe seats. Then you had a few extra nutters thrown in 2019 because some of the red wall seats were no hope seats. So you put a few loonies there because they had. So you put your loonies in either seats you're guaranteed to win or you've no chance. You don't put them in tight marginals because they're not going to win them. So we got rid of some who lost their red wall seats, and then there's the other ones in the very safe seats, even though Liz Truss did lose hers, amazingly. But I gather that the proportion stayed roughly the same. Had the Conservatives lost significantly more than they did, it would have been, the One Nation Conservatives would have been a really tiny caucus and had no impact. So at the moment, the proportions are actually the same as they were before. They're smaller numbers, but same proportions. But they've got no voice. Where's their voice? It was supposed to be Tom Tugendhat, wasn't it? Except Tom Tugendhat is actually quite extreme in some of his policies. And he was leaning into the extreme ones during the leadership contest, and he got nowhere. James Cleverly is not really. I mean, I'm not. I mean, he's probably more comfortable with the One Nation Tories than, you know, the Badenoch Jenrick crowd, because he's a bit more reasonable. But if he did succeed Badenoch, if, you know, Badenoch thought she's going to fall, and then they got someone else in, and it was James Cleverly, it's not going to be the One Nation Tories in charge again. I just don't see that they have they've either not got the fight in them, or they just don't think they have the membership on their side or something. So, and this is the thing, and what will happen is, if the Tories are destroyed, which in my mind doesn't mean that the party is destroyed, it means that they merge in some way with Reform UK. It doesn't have to be a formal merger like happened in Canada. It could just be, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, and then we'll step aside. And part of that X, Y, Z could be, you have to choose your candidates according to these things. So you could actually end up seeing, there's already been, Boris Johnson carried out a bit of a purge of certain Tories in 2019. Not just with the 19 he withdrew the whip from and wouldn't allow to stand, but just in general, all candidates had to sign up to his vision of Brexit, otherwise they weren't allowed to be candidates. So straight away, you didn't have, you instantly overnight created a Conservative Party where every 100% of all MPs had to publicly back the hard Brexit, and any ones that privately didn't had to keep it to themselves. So you've already changed the Conservative Party. It's already, you know, it's already sort of changed. It's just in theory, a lot of these people who were just pretending could come out the woodwork. But if there's a real effort to purge the party of everyone, like, and they could do it. If you had a leader who had the backing of the members, they could say, look, we're going to lose the next election. It won't be Badenoch because she'll be gone. But let's say the next leader's Jenrick, right? And let's say, because people aren't sure about Jenrick. They're not, because do you remember a few years ago, he was like a One Nation Tory, wasn't he? And now he's lent into, he's like Swella Braverman's, you know, bastard son. And it's, so people aren't really sure what he's like if he was leader. But I think he will carry on. I don't care what he believes personally. I think he will carry on leaning into this hard right stance. And I could see him, I'm not saying I think he will, but I could see him saying, look, we're going to lose the next election now. What we have to do is make sure we can rebuild and have a proper go at it next time. And we need to get rid of our dead wood, or call it something like that. And it'll be a mass purge of One Nation Tories, and there'll be nothing left. There'll be nothing left but people who are more aligned with Reform UK. At which point, then it's permanently changed. Because then, when he does lose the election, he has to stand aside, the MPs left are all of the same mind, so they'll just elect another nutter. And it'll carry on like that. Because that same nutter will have the same candidate selection priorities. So you will, at that point, all you've got left are Conservative MPs of a particular mind on a very narrow range of policies. And then you have permanently changed it. That's it. It's gone. It's finished. John saying, the only time in my life when the economy under the Conservatives was doing well was under Ken Clarke and John Major. One Nation Tories. Yes, it did. It did. The economy did actually do reasonably well under those. But it is what it is. But I don't think they've got any power anymore. And I think they could well be just physically gone. Famous X saying, in the leadership election, I went to a hustings in Wimbledon in my old school and met Tom. Think he's moderate but has to play to the right tune. I met Kemi and Jenrick. What a joke. Kemi Badenoch is actually just useless. Jenrick understands politics, but I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him, even if I was right wing. But Kemi Badenoch is I knew from the start she'd be hopeless. She was hopeless the moment she was put in cabinet. She doesn't do anything. She's lazy. She's just fundamentally lazy. She understands politics less well than Liz Truss. So she's basically she's someone who would have crashed the Tories as badly as Liz Truss did if she'd have been in charge. I wonder how the ban on second jobs will affect the Tories. Well, we'll find out, because some lobbying jobs have already been banned, and there was talk that some may decide it's not worth it and they'll just leave Parliament because they can't manage on a mere 90 grand a year. So we will see. We will see. And if any do stand down, that'll mean by-elections this year. Because at the moment, the only by-elections we're looking forward to maybe are Labour ones. So there's the fella who punched a constituent, which is... even Reform UK don't think that's a good idea. And then there's the latest one with the hate speech against Diane Abbott and Angela Rayner. Now, they could... I mean, they're not getting the Labour whip back under any circumstances. So either they will step down or they'll just carry on as an independent. But anyway, I think Jenrick realises a personality-free zone, so has adopted strong right to make himself more noticeable. What I suspect of Robert Jenrick. So remember, even when Rishi Sunak was made Prime Minister, Robert Jenrick, big supporter of his. Oh, big supporter, right? Then he went to the Home Office, and he says that what he saw at the Home Office changed his mind on various things, but we know he's lying. What I think happened was he saw that Rishi Sunak was definitely going to... By the time Robert Jenrick was starting to turn into a nutter, Rishi Sunak was clearly failing. There were things he could have done, didn't do them. He was failing. And it was very obvious that after Sunak, like the metronome would just go from one to the other. So Sunak's described as this raging Marxist, right? So because, these people who are actually extremely right-wing insist that they're centre-right. So if you insist you're centre-right, well, where's Rishi Sunak? Must be a bloody communist. So Rishi Sunak, and he's actually, they call him that. They don't call him a Marxist, but they do call him a socialist. Even Kemi Badenoch has described Rishi Sunak's leadership as socialist, if you believe that. Anyway, so Robert Jenrick realised that what was going to have to come after it was a real tilt to the right. He wanted to be leader, so he just adopted that persona. And he still will be now, because he's not going to moderate now, because apart from anything else, people really won't trust him then. If he seems to flip, never mind the party flipping between different types of leader, if he seems to flip between different personalities, no one's going to trust him. So I think he's stuck with it now. But also, at the moment, if Badenoch was to go this year, and I still would find that difficult to believe, but but if she were to go sooner rather than later, you would think it's Jenrick against Cleverly. Those would be the two obvious picks, unless someone else emerges. I'm not seeing anyone emerge at the moment. So yeah, Jenrick is just leaning into it. I don't know what he really believes. It could be that he's been like that for a long time, and he only pretended to be centre-right before. I mean, who knows? It's like Liz Truss. We talk about the fact Liz Truss campaigned for Remain, but then she became an ardent Brexiteer. Does that mean that her Brexit position is a lie? No, maybe not. Maybe she campaigned for Remain because her party's leadership were campaigning for Remain, even though the party was officially neutral. That was only to stop them splitting up. So, you know, she was a cabinet minister under David Cameron. She believed that David Cameron would carry on being prime minister for a bit. So she just adopted. I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether she's a real Brexiteer or not. And that's the problem with some of these conservatives. You don't actually know where they really stand. You know, Rishi Sunak is actually the only prime minister we've ever had that was pro-Brexit. Because even Boris Johnson, although he supported the Leave campaign, up until a few months before it, he was very anti-Brexit. He wasn't pro-EU. He was very anti-EU, hated the EU. But he was very anti-Brexit because he was one of those, what you call pragmatic Remainers, that felt it would be madness to leave the single market. And he said so many times over many years. So he wasn't a real one. The only one who was a real Brexiteer was Rishi Sunak. And what's the first thing he did is he sort of moderated Brexit a little bit because it had gone too far. Anyway, Nova's saying, haven't had a chance to catch you on live stream. Being a thingy lot, and sadly, hospital is starting to fudge the wait times by moving everyone into SDECU. Don't know what that is. So there is an extent to which, if you set a target, for something, people will want to meet that target and move to things. But what I would say is this: Labour haven't as yet set those targets. So if waiting lists are coming down for elective treatment, then they can't be doing it by shifting them somewhere else. If A&E waiting times or waiting lists are coming down, waiting times are coming down, that could be shifting them somewhere else. But I'm not sure how you fiddle a wait time for treatment. But I don't know. Anyway, the general voter falls prey to two contradicting fallacies: the fallacy of permanence and immediacy. It's really frustrating trying to point this out. Yes. I mean, but that's fine. Again, so it's one of these things. At the moment, you have a situation where, you know, people are going, "Oh, we can't see the difference with Labour. We can't see the difference with Labour," and it's like, okay, well, there are some differences, but mostly, yes, you're not going to see them because their budget still isn't in place and the legislation is still going through Parliament. It's like, how do you think the government changes things? It changes things not with the power of prayer. It changes things with budgets and legislation. And there hasn't been time for either of them to go through. But by the election, there will be. Because it's not like the public have an emergency lever to pull if they decide they want another election. So, you know, the election will happen when Labour want it to happen because their majority is huge. So that election will happen. If they think they're ready to go in 2028, it will be in 2028. If they actually do want to go for the full time, it'll be in 2029. Famous X saying, I wish May's deal got through in 2018. She likely would have been PM during the pandemic. Then someone like Rory Stewart or Penny Mordaunt could have taken over, would likely have won 2024 barely. No. It really wouldn't have happened like that. I mean, first of all, they were never going to let that deal go through. I mean, that's fundamentally what it has. If Theresa May had have had the ability to ram that deal through, she wouldn't have needed to ram that deal through. She'd have been able to adopt a softer Brexit. The reason, remember, why she went for that election in 2017 is because all Theresa May had to do was cancel our EU membership. That was all the referendum required. It didn't require leaving the single market. It didn't require leaving the customs union. It wouldn't have made any sense leaving the EU and not leaving the single market customs union. But then leaving all three didn't make sense either. None of it made sense. But she would not have chosen to do that because she knew that was insane. The reason why she set up those red lines was because she didn't have the numbers. to like face down the faction that was trying to split the party. So it was never going to happen. And the thing is as well, imagine the situation we would have been in, because she wouldn't have lasted. They would have got someone else in, maybe Boris Johnson, right? There's no way she'd have been around for the pandemic. And also, I think you may have more faith in her. I mean, she would have been better than Boris Johnson. But it was Theresa May in charge when... So remember, one of the big things that came out from the pandemic, and it wouldn't have mattered who was Prime Minister at that time. It wouldn't have mattered who won the 2019 election if that had still gone ahead. One of the big problems we had is we had no useful stockpiles of PPE. The last time that we had built up stockpiles of PPE is when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. So they're a little bit out of date. So although there's a lot of focus on the fact that Boris Johnson, when he became Prime Minister, was told in 2019, these stockpiles aren't good enough, we need to boost them, and he said no. Theresa May was the Prime Minister before that. She would have been told that as well. So, you know, it would have been better than Boris Johnson. It would not have been good. But that deal was never going through. Because the deal was either impossible or unnecessary, depending on how you look at it. It was, if she had the numbers to get the deal through, it was unnecessary to put that deal through. You'd put a better deal through. You'd do one that keeps us, you would retain access to the single market. And I know her deal was sort of that, but it was very loose. In fact, I don't actually know why the Brexiteers opposed her deal, because all they had to do was let it go through, exit the EU, and then get someone in charge who would say, we think the conditions have been met, we don't need the safety net, the backstop. And then just unilaterally pull out the single market. And that would have created pandemonium in Northern Ireland. But they'd have done it. They'd have done it. So yeah, no, I you know, there was no way of getting it through. The issue with 2028 is the timing of the last elections mean the Parliament will be fewer than 4 years. If they hold it in May, which they probably will, I mean, there's all sorts of issues. I mean, the issue is like, I get the impression, I mean, they're always going to talk about, right, we're going to have the election in 2029. That's what Keir Starmer's going to say. He will always say that because he's hardly likely to say, I want it in 2028, because then what happens if he doesn't have it in 2028? So it's always better to assume it's in 2029. But I get the impression they really do mean to do it in 2029. But the problem with that is, what happens if something, you know, if there's... Because the reason why you have an election usually after 4 years is you aim for... If you're going to win out, even if you're going to lose some seats, as long as you're going to retain a decent majority, you go for it. Because anything can happen in that 5th year. Anything can happen. You know, we could get an attack of space monkeys or something. So it's, if you're in a winning position a year out from when you have to have the election, you hold it there. But yeah, I mean, the timing is awkward, but I would still say you could still, it would be fewer than 4 years technically, but only a bit, only by a couple of months. And you don't have to have it in May. It can be in June. It's just, it makes, and if you're, in fact, to be honest with you, there would potentially be an advantage in holding it in June if things are going well, because then they can have themselves a decent local election bout, maybe, if they think they're on for one. Otherwise, you would hold it on the same day as the local election. But you know, you can have some local elections, build up a bit of steam, and then have the election in June. You call it straight after the local elections. Did I see something about Starmer solidifying our defence of Ukraine despite Trump's move? By rhetoric, yes. So Starmer has said that it's up to Ukraine what happens, and that he'll back them regardless. But, and Zelensky's been open about this, the only country that can actually back Ukraine is America. Like, and he's been very specific. It's not just about the value of the military support either. You know, Zelensky said they need Patriot missile systems. They're American. Now, America would be happy to sell them. Sure, if America, I mean, in fact, Trump's talked about that. He's talked about, well, I tell you what, why don't we pull out and you just buy all our stuff for us that we'd been previously contributing? So that's Trump's position at the moment. And it's a bit like, yeah, mate, if we had that much money, we'd be developing our own systems. So, yeah, this is the problem. So, yeah, Starmer has said, just like, you know, over Gaza, he said, no, we are still committed to the two-state solution. But at the end of the day, if America does decide to invade Gaza and kick out all the Palestinians and say, this is ours now, what are we going to do? Nothing we can do. We can, I suppose, do something with Ukraine. We can carry on supporting them and see it string out. But as Zelensky said, I mean, if America pulls out, maybe the rest of us just say, right, then we need to not hold back within international law, and you need to be able to properly target, you know, targets in Russia, maybe, I don't know. But we just don't, we're on our arse. I mean, and I know at the moment the British Army and the armed forces in general, but the British Army, past and present generals are all, you know, saying, oh, we're knackered, we can't do anything. Like the latest one they're saying is, we're not capable of leading a European-led force in Ukraine because we just don't have the resources. And it's a bit like, so they're obviously going to say that anyway because they want more budget. Of course they do. Their budget's been cut back over the last 15 years. Of course they want it boosting back up again. But at the same time, we still spend more than any other European country. So I don't know to what extent these senior British officers are painting this picture of a knackered British military. I don't know how much of it is accurate and how much of it is just browbeating the government. But if any of it is even remotely true, we spend the most on defence, on European defence of any country in Europe. So what does that mean for everyone else? John saying increased European defence spending should be going to develop and building European weapons and equipment. Yes, it should. Yeah. Trump wants them to just buy. I mean, I suppose the problem with that is you're basically saying to Putin, can we have a bit of a ceasefire for 5 years while we develop these systems? And it might take 15 years. I mean, do you remember the Eurofighter, the Typhoon? How long that took? That was a long old time. That was already going to take a lot of time, and it went massively over, didn't it? It's quite good in the end, but, you know, nonetheless, that took bloody years to develop. But anyway. When did they say, not sure if anyone's asked this, Denmark, our reporter, has given Ukraine all their fighter planes, I think you mean rather than plans. So, yeah, I mean, we do still need planes. We can't just give Ukraine all of them because Russia is constantly invading our airspace around the North Sea. Band of Arjip said, European defence equals European jobs. Yeah, they do need to develop capacity in Europe. If America's going to say that we're going to manage without them, and we should have started this 8 years ago, shouldn't we? We should have started it when Trump first came to power, and I don't know why we didn't. Ukraine's asked for the creation of a European army. Macron original plan. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing I say. Either we're going to carry on having Russia kicking the shit out of us, and you know, just wait till he starts cutting undersea cables, internet. Just wait till he shuts us off from the internet between us, Europe and America. But anyway, so we either just let Russia carry on being a bell end, or we have to, because Trump has made it clear. Whether he goes through with it is another matter. Because if you look at his stuff on tariffs, like Trump's talking a lot about tariffs, but if you actually look at what he's actually done with tariffs, what is it? It's 10% on China. He's now applied tariffs on steel and aluminium, which he also did last time. But that's it. I mean, if you looked at the news, you might imagine there's tariffs all over the place at the moment, but it's like there's tariffs on steel and aluminium from everywhere. And there's 10% tariffs on Chinese imports into America. and that's it. So it might be the same with NATO. He might just be, you know, talking a load of shit and at the end of the day pull back. It's just at the moment I just don't see him pulling back from anything. He's just I don't know. John, they're saying the UK's next 6th generation fighter is likely to be a collaboration with Italy and Japan. But I mean, how long is that going to take as well? But anyway, yeah, what we need to do, if we're going to be on our own, we do need a European army. What's the point of having NATO without America? I mean, you know, I'm sure we're all very grateful to Canada's input, but at the end of the day, we might as well just do it ourselves, aren't we? And therein it'll be hilarious, absolutely hilarious, because then you will have this EU army that the Brexiteers were whining about will actually be a thing. And who will have caused it? Their hero, Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, it's not like that it was just a consequence of Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants Europe to form its own army. He said so. That's what he wants. He's saying, do your own. So, all right then. I really hope Labour find a way to succeed in defence revamp. Well, what they should be looking at is Donald Tusk's idea, because that allows you to have a massive boost in military spending that creates jobs around Europe, including the UK, and you don't have to add it to your budget. It doesn't have to be featured in your budget because it'll be common debt. The Brexit papers all find themselves in a quandary. They'll not like the fact that we're sharing debt with the EU, but at the same time, the purpose of it will be to defend Ukraine. And as we saw with the Julia Hartless-Brewer takedown of Richard Tice, there are those on the right who are on Ukraine's side. Not all of them, as I pointed out in the video. The Daily Express take Putin's side. The Daily Telegraph and the Times tend to be on Ukraine's side. I'm not really sure about the Daily Mail, if I'm honest. The thing is, if the manufacture of armaments are kept within Europe, a lot of the money will stay in our economies. Yes, also drive innovation into other sectors. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. If you spend money on weapons from America, you're going to be paying top dollar, literally. And yeah, that money's disappearing to America with no return here because Trump has an America first attitude. Whereas if you develop in Europe, then yeah, as you say, you're creating jobs in Europe. The money stays in Europe largely. There's always going to be components you need from elsewhere, but the money stays in Europe. And you develop your own systems. And in time, you reduce reliance on America. And this is why it's crazy what America do. If they want to do it, it's fine. It's perfectly reasonable, by the way. But what it means is, if we are no longer, if Donald Trump forces us to Trump-proof or America-proof our economies, then all of a sudden we're no longer as dependent on America for our economies. And then if he forces us to America-proof our military, then if you get to a point where Europe isn't totally dependent on America, either economically or militarily, then when America does crazy shit on the world stage, they'll have people telling them no. The Daily Mail on Australia's side, I guess. No, they're not. Australia hate them. Daily Mail never met a dictator they didn't like. No, indeed. But anyway. The problem at the moment is, of course, that it would take time to set up these systems. To first of all, it's not even like European leaders have gone, yeah, we need to do this, let's just do it. They're still fannying about as far as I can tell. Like, I've heard Donald Tusk announce this thing. I've not heard a load of other European leaders go, what a brilliant... We wouldn't expect Orban to do so. But you would think most of the others, not all, but most of the others go, what a great idea, let's do that. Or at least let's talk about it seriously. I'm not hearing any signs of that. So they're not even... European leaders don't even have a plan at the moment. They're talking about possibilities, but they don't have a plan. And then when they do, it'll take time. And in the meantime, Ukraine is on borrowed time now, because Trump could just completely pull out. I was laying my hopes on and I'd said this, two things. First of all, we know that Trump was fanboying over Putin, but Putin was seen as a winner then. Now he's not, he's a loser. So the hope was that you could tell Trump, Putin's a loser, why are you backing him? And the second hope was that the dollar signs over the rare earth mining in Ukraine would appeal to him. But it could well be that actually that's gone the other way. And he's seen that he's obviously not going to get the benefits of those mining operations while the war is going on. And he thinks the war can be over quicker if he backs Russia than if he backs Ukraine. So we basically have to show that that's not true. But notes then, I believe the combination of immigration, housing and Liz Truss, the true thing which will destroy the Tories, making reform have to take up the right wing. But again, it comes down to this. Reform UK are not turning themselves into a proper party. They are a cult of Nigel Farage. There's nothing else to it. Like, if you look at the Republicans, I mean, at the moment, yes, they're captured by MAGA. They are a cult of Donald Trump. But when Donald Trump, disappears into the sunset or shuffles off this mortal coil, assuming he's not actually immortal, then Republicans will just become Republicans again. Because they don't really have anyone else to take over. But what happens to Reform UK if something happens to Nigel Farage? What do? They'll carry on, of course. They'll carry on with Richard Tice as leader again, but they'll just collapse like a souffle, won't they? They'll just go. There's no long-term plan for Reform UK unless Nigel Farage is prepared to relinquish control. And the thing is, if they were serious, there'd be no reason not to. It's not like Nigel Farage is at risk of being replaced as leader. There's no risk of it, even if he gave up control. Because Zia Yusuf, who's the chair, who's the one who's wanting them to become a proper party, their idea for replacing the leader is that it be the members that drive it. So I think the MPs have a role as well, but it would need the backing of at least half the membership. Now, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. You're not going to have a situation where half of the Reform UK members are willing to get rid of Nigel Farage, unless he wants to go. Wanga Pagan, they're saying shared common debt sounds a lot like Labour's Nature Restoration Fund, very possibly. But this one would be shared with EU members, so the Daily Mail won't like it. But as I say, it's like it'll be in the interests of defending Ukraine. So it's like, yeah, it'll be hard for them to argue against it. They'll give it a go, mind you. Housing, going back to Praneta's comment about it being immigration, housing and Liz Truss. So I actually don't think housing will finish the Tories off at all. I actually worry, it's not a reason not to do it, but I actually worry that by Labour creating lots of new homeowners, homeowners creates Conservatives of the future, because it's ever been thus. What happens is, well, in modern times anyway, what happens is you're young, you're in your 20s, you're going to, when capitalism is sort of working, you're going to have the biggest struggles of your life. You're on the lowest wage, you're on the bottom rung of your career ladder, so you're on the lowest wage you're ever going to be. You've got your highest accommodation costs because you're renting. If you're lucky, you've got parents who are wealthy enough and live near where you work to be able to let you carry on living there for nothing. But for most people, you're going to have to move. You're going to need your own place. So you're paying rent. Everything. There's nothing efficient. There's no efficient spending. So you're paying the highest rates for everything. Excuse me. You've got your lowest salary. Then you get onto the housing ladder, and also you're having to put money aside to get onto the housing ladder, right? So you're living like a pauper. Then you get onto the housing ladder, things ease a little bit. 10 years' time, your mortgage repayments are not as much as rent would be on the same sort of property. 20 years' time, you're now looking good. You're up the career ladder, your salary's now good, your mortgage payments are now what they were probably 20 years ago, but now relative to your income, it's a much smaller proportion. So you're starting to think, I'd quite like to retire early. So, you then start to look to the party that says, oh, we'll save you a few taxes and give you tax breaks for saving and investing and stuff like that. So you turn conservative. What broke that cycle was not being able to get onto the housing ladder. So you now have people who are about 40 years old who, if anything, are struggling more than when they were 20. Their standard of living has actually gone down, not up. So by Labour, if they do solve the housing problem, and we've got a load more homeowners, in 20 years' time, you might turn them back into Conservative voters again. So, no, I don't think housing will do it. I do. Immigration is a massive problem for them, because how do you trust them on immigration looking at their record? Like Boris Johnson was the one who was very anti-immigration. We had Priti Patel as the Home Secretary, very anti-immigration, and yet they gave us record immigration. I mean, there's a point at which people will say, why was that? Because they don't know the real reasons. I mean, I've explained the reason earlier in this video. But people don't know the reasons, so they can only look at it superficially. And they will have to conclude either Priti Patel and Boris Johnson were lying, in which case how do we know that the new Conservative leadership isn't lying, or the Conservative way of dealing with immigration doesn't work, that their methods don't work. Because it's got to be one or the other. You know, they won't, most people don't really think about competence when it comes to policies like this. But there we go. Maybe we should play Putin at his own game. He keeps threatening to use his nukes. No, I don't think we should. We don't need to. We don't need to. Russia's army, such as it was, broke itself on Ukraine. No one believes that it's going to escalate, because how many red lines have we already crossed? You know, Putin's go, oh, if you do this, I'm going to nuke you. If you do, no, all right, I won't nuke you this time. But if you do this other thing, I'm going to nuke. He's been doing it for years. He hasn't done anything. He daren't do anything. It's mutually assured destruction. They say European troops could deploy to the Ukraine-Belarus border. That would free up 120,000 Ukrainian troops to be deployed to the east. Well, I mean, that's what I hope would happen if America did say we're leaving. That we would say, okay, well, if you don't want to be in charge, then... But I don't know how many in Europe want that either. There seems to be hesitancy in Europe. We'll have to see what happens. I think one of the ones who was hesitant was Scholz, and obviously he'll be going soon. We'll have to see what happens with the new Chancellor. Obviously, Poland is very keen on boots on the ground, like European boots on the ground in Ukraine. I'm not 100% sure what our view on it is, but I don't think we're opposed. I don't think we were, either the Conservatives or Labour were opposed. France, I think, was reasonably keen. I think Germany was a big argument against. I'm not sure where Italy stand on that. Urbane Legends there saying 42 here will never own a home. 22 years working, yeah. And that's a problem for a lot of people, as I say, because your rent will keep going up. Your mortgage payments, once you've got a mortgage, interest rates can affect them, sure, but basically stays where it is. Unless, of course, you've got a mortgage during those times when interest rates were pretty much zero, and now they're not. But even then, I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not like in the early 90s where it just shot out of all control. So you've got, you've got people who, if they'd have got a mortgage 20 years ago, you might have, you know, something like £200-300 mortgage payments. So that's actually with the, you know, let's say £300 or so, on like, depends where you live. There were some people living in the south east thinking, Phil, what you want? That was never the case. It was where I lived. You could have a £300 mortgage 20 years ago, and that's what you're paying now. Whereas the rent on a place like that would probably be £800 to £900. And it's stuff like that stops capitalism working for people. The Conservatives were insane not to build houses. But they got themselves in this trap. I mean, George Osborne explained it to a Lib Dem apparently in the coalition years. They got themselves into this trap of, if we build houses, then we're basically seeding future voters. But if we build houses in the wrong places, we piss off the voters at the very... Because if you build new houses, the people who get them aren't going to become Conservative voters for another 15, 20 years. If they're going to turn at all. Not all of them do, obviously. But, you know, it's... Whereas if you build them in the wrong place and piss off people in those places, you lose the next election. And that was their quandary. But it was utterly insane. It was very short-termism. They should have just built new towns. I mean, Labour are building basically new towns. I mean, they are extensions to existing towns, but they're right on the edges of it. It's like they're effectively new towns, just bolted to other ones. They could have just done that. Wouldn't have pissed anyone off. But anyway, right, we'll run out of time though. Just do this last comment. Mum was homeowner until she sold the house. Long story, never Tory dad, co-homeowner. Bigger fan of Thatcher than me, not homeowner at 47, never Tory. Well, again, there's always going to be people in various different situations. There'll be people who are Conservative even when they live in poverty their entire life, like Alf Garnett types. And you will have people who will never turn Conservative even if they become millionaires. But nonetheless, you know, it is the ones who turn, that it is known, it's been the case for generations until recently, that you get people in middle age, some people who did vote, you know, Lib Dem or Labour or something like that in this country, suddenly start voting Conservative. It's not a huge number, but in a first past the post system, it's enough to swing things. And it's just been caused by, you know, people feel better off and start to look at early retirement. And the Conservatives seem to have, you know, they're the ones who talk about, oh yeah, we're going to do this and it'll help you retire early. Whether it does or it doesn't is another matter. But it's gone now. But there we go. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of the evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.